The accident happened on Thursday, when the sun was at its zenith. The reactor burst open like an overripe fruit, spewing invisible flames. For the first day, no one understood the scale of the disaster. The sensors were silent. The operators stared at the instruments and couldn't believe the dead dials on the panels. Radio waves died first. Communication was cut off within a radius of 300 kilometers. Dispatchers shouted into microphones into the void. A week later, the military arrived. They walked in protective suits, but already on the outskirts they felt something strange. The world had become silent. Their footsteps made no sound. Their cries froze in their throats, never reaching the ears of their comrades. Radiation devoured the impulses in their auditory nerves. The first soldier took off his helmet and tried to say something. His lips moved, but even he could not hear his own voice forever. By the end of the month, the area was cordoned off. Yellow tape surrounded the dead space. People stood at the checkpoints with signs that read, "Do not enter." The ghost town was deserted in 3 days. Residents fled, leaving their apartments open. The wind blew through the empty streets without a sound. Only the trees remained silent. They swayed silently, like dancers in a silent movie. Their leaves rustled only for themselves. Scientists came during the first year. They measured, recorded, and built hypotheses. But each visit irreversibly shortened their hearing. A young physicist wrote in his diary, "The silence here is not the absence of sound. It is the presence of something else that absorbs the very essence of sound." The government declared the area closed forever. Maps were redrawn, erasing roads and villages from them. The place became a blank spot in atlases. But people remembered. Old people told their grandchildren about the city where absolute silence now reigned. The children listened, not quite believing it. A year passed. The zone lived its own life. Grass sprouted through the asphalt. The buildings stood untouched, as if frozen in anticipation of the scenery. Birds flew around this place. Animals sensed the border by instinct and did not cross it. Only insects crawled around, knowing no fear. In the spring, apple trees bloomed in abandoned gardens. The flowers opened silently, scattering their petals silently onto the silent ground beneath them. The rains fell without thunder. Lightning flashed in complete silence. The storm turned into a silent spectacle of light, frightening in its unnaturalness. 3 years later, the first daredevils appeared. Stalkers, as they called themselves. They were looking for artifacts and simply for thrills. One of them returned deaf but rich. He brought back strange crystals that glowed in the dark. Collectors paid for them with gold. Others did not return at all. The zone accepted everyone, but did not let everyone leave. Their bodies were later found lying in natural positions of rest and sleep. Scientists from other countries came to study the phenomenon. They built theories about the altered physics of space. They published articles in journals. A French professor suggested that radiation had created a new state of matter. In this state, sound waves faded instantly and forever. The Japanese sent robots. The machines entered the zone and transmitted data. But their microphones recorded only absolute emptiness, nothing more. 5 years passed. Nature was advancing. Vines entwined the power line poles. Foxes made their dens in the basements of multi-story buildings. In winter, the zone was covered with snow. The white silence became absolute. Even the crunch of snow underfoot disappeared as if it had never been there. A group of artists received permission to make a film. They worked in masks, filming the silent beauty of the dead city. A documentary film. The director lost hearing in his left ear. But he said it was worth it. The film won an award at the Cannes Film Festival a year later. Children from neighboring towns drew pictures of the zone at school. They depicted gray buildings and empty streets. Teachers hung the drawings on the classroom walls. The zone became part of culture. Books were written about it. Composers wrote symphonies of silence. Philosophers reflected on the nature of sound in general. One poet wrote, "A new language is born in the zone of silence, a language of gestures, glances, and touches, a language long forgotten by civilization." 10 years later, A museum was built on the border of the zone. It housed photographs, documents, and personal belongings of the city's evacuated residents. Tourists came by the thousands. They looked at the zone from a safe distance. They bought souvenirs, small yellow radiation hazard signs. But some wanted more. They crossed the border at night. They were looking for thrills. Many of them went deaf, but they kept coming back. A subculture of children of silence emerged. Young people deliberately entered the zone. They considered deafness to be an initiation into another reality of existence. The government fought against this phenomenon. Security was tightened, but it was impossible to control a border hundreds of kilometers long with complete accuracy. 15 years passed. The zone grew slowly but steadily. Every year, the border shifted by several meters. This was measured accurately with instruments. Scientists argued about the causes. Some spoke of the accumulation of radioactive elements in the soil. Others spoke of unknown physical processes inside. 2 villages were evacuated. The residents grumbled but obeyed. They left, looking back at their homes, which would soon enter the zone forever. By the 20th year, the zone had become a state within a state, with its own laws, or rather with a complete absence of them. Anarchy and silence reigned. Permanent residents appeared inside. Deaf people for whom the zone was paradise. They built houses from the ruins. They grew vegetables in their gardens. Their community grew. They communicated in sign language. They created their own culture and traditions. They celebrated holidays with dancing to silent music. The authorities tried to evict them, but the community resisted passively. They simply returned again and again. In the end, they were left alone. The first children born in the zone appeared. They had never heard any sounds. For them, silence was the natural state of the world from birth. These children saw reality differently. Their other senses were heightened to compensate. They could distinguish vibrations and feel the slightest movements of air around them. Scientists wanted to study them, but the community denied them access. They protected their children from the outside world. They built their own isolated civilization. 30 years had passed since the accident. The older generation remembered the time before the zone. The younger ones knew about it only from stories and books about the past. Technology advanced. Implants appeared that restored hearing, but they did not work in the zone. Radiation instantly blocked the electronics. Corporations offered huge sums of money for the right to explore the zone. The government refused. The zone remained closed to commercial use, but smuggling flourished. Artifacts from the zone were sold on the black market. Strange crystals, glowing stones, deformed metals from the center. Some artifacts had unusual properties. They changed color depending on the temperature, or levitated in a magnetic field in a strange way. Collectors paid millions. Stalkers risked their lives and hearing. A shadow economy flourished around the dead zone, which continued to expand. By the 1940s, the zone had become a tourist attraction. Observation decks were built. Safe tours were organized around the perimeter of the border. Guides told stories about the first days after the accident, about attempts to clean up, about people who consciously chose silence as their home forever. Photographers took pictures of the zone from drones. The results were mesmerizing shots, a city engulfed by greenery, nature reclaiming the territory of man. The zone became a symbol. Environmentalists spoke of the triumph of nature. Technophobes spoke of the curse of progress. Mystics saw it as a portal to other worlds. Artists drew inspiration from it. Writers created novels. Directors shot films. The zone multiplied in art, becoming a modern cultural myth. 50 years passed. The community in the zone numbered several thousand people. They built an entire city inside the dead territory under the sky. They had their own architecture. Buildings were designed with vibrations in mind. Walls were made of materials that enhanced the tactile sensations of the inhabitants. They developed their own writing system. It was not sound-based, but visual and tactile. Books were created with raised symbols. They were read slowly and carefully with the fingers. Their art was strange to the outside world. dances without music, theatre without words, where everything was expressed through movement and light on stage. The younger generation outside envied them. In a world of noise and chaos, the community of silence seemed like an oasis of calm. Many wanted to join them, but the community did not accept everyone. You had to pass a test, live in the zone for a year, prove that silence was your choice, not an escape from life. By the 60th year, the zone had stopped growing. The borders had stabilized. Scientists breathed a sigh of relief. The catastrophe had finally reached equilibrium with the world. Inside, the processes slowed down. Radiation was falling, but it was still deadly to the unprotected. Silence reigned absolute, as before, forever. A new science emerged: zonology. Universities opened departments. Young scientists devoted their lives to studying this unique and strange phenomenon. They created a map of anomalies. They identified zones with varying degrees of danger. They found places where the silence was complete and where sound died away gradually and smoothly. One researcher spent 5 years in the zone. She went completely deaf, but wrote a monograph. The work became a classic of zonology for centuries to come. The government eased restrictions. It allowed limited access for scientists and artists, but only with the signing of documents of full personal responsibility. 70 years passed. The old people who remembered the accident died. Their children also grew old. Their grandchildren grew up knowing the zone as a fact of history, not a tragedy. The community inside developed. They learned to use energy differently. Solar panels covered the roofs. Windmills spun silently on the hills. Their agriculture flourished. Radiation strangely improved the fertility of some areas. Vegetables grew huge, albeit slightly deformed in shape. They created their own medicine. They treated themselves with herbs and vibrations. They learned to sense illness through touch. Their healers were famous even beyond the zone. The outside world was changing rapidly. Cities were growing upward. Technology was accelerating, but the zone remained an island of slowness in an ocean of rapid, modern progress. 80 years after the accident, a crisis occurred. The global economy collapsed, cities rebelled, but the zone remained calm, securely isolated. Refugees flocked to the borders. They sought refuge. The communities accepted a few. Those who entered left their old lives outside the zone forever. Silence became a valuable commodity. In a world filled with information noise, people dreamed of peace. The zone became a place of pilgrimage for the spiritually modern. A monastery was built on the border. The monks took a vow of silence and periodically entered the zone. They sought enlightenment in the absolute silence of the heavenly heights. Philosophers debated the nature of consciousness in silence. Does a person deprived of sound change? Does he become more or less human in the end? One thinker wrote, "The zone of silence is a mirror of humanity. It shows who we become when what we considered fundamental is taken away." 90 years passed. The world recovered from the crisis. New technologies were born, but the zone remained unchanged, an island of yesterday's past. Scientists made a breakthrough. They created a suit that partially protected the nervous system. Now it was possible to spend days in the zone without complete deafness. Expeditions became more frequent. They penetrated deeper and deeper. They found the center of the accident, a destroyed reactor still constantly emitting invisible death around it. A strange anomaly formed around the reactor. The air there flickered. Compasses did not work. Those who entered told of strange, eerie visions and hallucinations. One researcher returned changed. He said he had seen time, that in the center of the zone, the past and the future existed simultaneously. No one listened to him. They wrote it off as radiation damage to the brain, but many people later read his diaries, and some believed his words about time deeply. 100 years after the accident, the zone became part of the world's heritage. UNESCO recognized it as a unique cultural and natural site on planet Earth. A research center was built on the border. The world's best minds worked there. They studied the physics of silence. They tried to understand the nature of the zone's anomaly deeply. A theory emerged. Radiation had created a new quantum state of matter. In it, sound waves collapsed at the subatomic level instantly, always, constantly. If this was true, then the zone was not a disaster, but a portal, a window into new physics, into an understanding of reality that could change the world forever. Corporations became interested again. They offered funding. They promised technological breakthroughs. The government hesitated, weighing the risks and benefits carefully. The community inside protested. For them, the zone was home, a sacred place. They did not want corporations to desecrate it with their greed and terrible avarice. Tension grew. Outside, there was pressure for progress. Inside, there was resistance to tradition. The zone became a battleground between two different visions of the future world. 110 years passed. The government made its decision. The zone would remain closed to commercial exploitation. It would be studied, but not used for profit. The corporations left disappointed. But the research continued. Scientists worked slowly, cautiously. They respected the zone and its deep, ancient, unknown secrets. Inside, the community celebrated their victory. They danced silently under the stars. Their movements were a prayer of gratitude to the cosmos for protection and true peace. A new generation was born in the zone. Children whose great-grandfathers had come here after the accident. For them, the outside world was alien, incomprehensible, excessively noisy. Some left. They wanted to see the world beyond. They wore implants that restored their hearing. But most returned. The silence called them back home. 120 years passed. The zone became a legend. Children all over the world knew about it. Textbooks wrote about the great catastrophe and its strange consequences. Tourism reached its peak. Millions came to see the border. The observation decks were expanded. Hotels, restaurants, and colorful souvenir shops were built. But the zone itself remained untouched. Inside, time flowed differently, slower. Nature and man existed in a fragile but stable, durable and reliable balance. The trees in the zone grew strangely. They twisted and twisted in bizarre ways. Their wood had unusual properties. One company tried to use it, but the implants were quickly rejected. The zone resisted exploitation. It was as if it had a will of its own. Scientists argued, was it intelligent? Or was it just physical processes that we did not understand? The philosophical question remained open. But the practical conclusion was clear. The zone had to be left alone. Study it, but don't use it for commercial purposes. 130 years passed. The world changed beyond recognition. Artificial intelligence controlled cities. People flew to the stars. But the zone remained the same as ever. Cosmonauts returning from Mars said, "The silence there is different, cold, dead. But in the zone, the silence is alive. It breathes, pulsates invisibly, constantly. The zone became a place of meditation for a new generation. Young people came to the border. They sat for hours looking at the dead city. They sought answers to questions. What does it mean to be human? Do we need sound? What remains when a basic sense is taken away? The zone asked questions without giving answers. New religions emerged, centered on the zone. Cults of silence preached the rejection of sound as the path to true, absolute spiritual enlightenment. The authorities watched warily, but they did not interfere. Freedom of religion was sacred. As long as the cults did not pose an obvious danger to society, 140 years passed. The community in the zone numbered tens of thousands of people. They built an entire civilization inside, with its own economy, culture, and laws. They traded with the outside world. Their handicrafts were highly valued. Jewelry made from zone crystals. Fabrics dyed with unusual local pigments. Their philosophy attracted scientists. They saw the world through touch, vibrations, light. Their art was tactile. Sculptures that had to be touched with your hands. One of their works ended up in the Louvre, an abstract form made of zone metal. cold to the touch, but radiating warmth. Visitors stood for hours, touching it. Critics argued about its meaning, but everyone agreed. This was art of a different order. It spoke a language that the outside world had long forgotten. The zone taught the world to see differently. It reminded us that a person is more than the sum of their senses, that the loss of one opens the door to another. 150 years had passed since the accident. The world celebrated the anniversary. Documentaries were shown on all channels. Historians analyzed the events of the past in depth. The elders of the community gave interviews using gestures. Translators conveyed their words. The zone is not a curse, it is a gift. It taught us to hear the silence of the heart. Young scientists continued their research. They discovered new anomalies. They found connections between radiation and consciousness. They built bridges between physics and deep philosophy. They proposed a plan to try to clean up the zone in 100 years. Technology made it possible, but a poll showed that the majority were against it. They wanted to keep the zone as it was. It had become part of the global cultural, spiritual, and scientific ecosystem. Removing it would mean erasing part of human experience, a lesson that must not be forgotten. So the zone remained, an island of silence in a noisy world, a reminder of the fragility of civilization, of the power of nature, of the human ability to always adapt. In the evening, when the sun set behind the dead city, the border of the zone glowed in the last rays. Its silent beauty mesmerized those who looked at it. And in this silence, absolute and complete, something new was born. An understanding that the end can be the beginning, that the death of sound gives birth to new life. The zone lived, it breathed, it changed those who approached it. And in its silence, humanity heard its heart beating in eternity. Cities grew and fell, empires rose and fell, technologies changed, but the zone remained, a constant in the equation of the variability of the human world of chaos. It was a mirror. It showed humanity its fears, hopes, dreams. In its silence, everyone found their own, or lost it, or found it again. Children drew it in schools. Poets sang its praises in verse. Composers tried to capture its silence in music. The zone lived in culture like a living mythology. And each generation rediscovered it, saw something of their own, learned something new. The zone was a teacher who did not speak, but always listened. So it continued. So it will continue. The zone of silence is an eternal reminder of what a person can lose and what they can gain in return. In its silence, the truth resounded. The world is bigger than we perceive. Reality is deeper than our senses. Silence is not emptiness. It is a different kind of fullness. And as long as the zone stands, as long as it keeps its secret, humanity will remember. Remember the lesson of catastrophe. Remember the power of adaptation. Remember the beauty of eternal silence. The years flowed like a river. The zone remained like a rock, unchanging in its changeability, alive in its death, resonating in its absolute silence forever.